Well, a very good morning, good evening, good afternoon to you, wherever you might be in the world. Welcome to Lorena's Labyrinth. I'm Anah Parreli, and today I'm going to be talking to you about abalone as basically from a healing perspective, the metaphysical perspective. Now, as always, if you're familiar with the channel, I always start with just a little bit of information gathering. I recognize that my videos can be quite long, so I put timing chapters, links into the description of the video so that you can jump to the content that's of interest to you, because I realize that we've all got different interests. If you're anything like me, I'm actually less interested in the geological aspects of a crystal as opposed to the metaphysical. But I realize also as a buyer that it's part of being discerning to make sure that you're not being ripped off by people that perhaps have got questionable ethics and standards. So I do incorporate that kind of information in the video as well. So the regulars, before I get into it, I just want to say thank you very, very much for being part of my journey. If you're new to the channel and you've only just subscribed, thank you for joining me. I have a feeling that going forward, it's going to become easier for me to actually do these recordings, because interaction and engagement goes a long way, I think, to motivating a person and to make the conversation a little bit more interesting. And of course, these are very one-sided conversations that I have on YouTube. But anyway, where I'm going with this is, I think from here on forward, I'm going to imagine that I have people that I've connected with that I know that are interested in the product, that they're sitting opposite me, and I'll be speaking to them, and that includes you if this is something that you're interested in. It makes it more personable. So anyway, as I said, we're going to talk about abalone today. Let's jump straight in and have a look at it, or have a look at the information I've found, because I always learn when I'm doing these videos as well. I get a bit more information for me too. So when it comes to learning for me, which it will probably be learning for some people as well, is that I was aware, because I'm Australian and because New Zealand is our closest next door neighbour, that the Kiwis, and that's what we Aussies call the New Zealanders, we call them Kiwis, that the Kiwis refer to the abalone shell as PAUA shell. But what I didn't know was in the UK, they call it, I believe, orma or mutton fish. Really, doesn't sound very nice. And just a useless bit of trivia people might not be aware if they're unfamiliar with the abalone shell, is that I can understand why the Brits would call it mutton fish. Well, I don't know so much about the mutton aspect, but certainly referring to it as a food source, because abalone is a food source. Okay, most people that I've met will know that it's a shellfish, and that the meat of the abalone is very exclusive. It's very pricey. It sells for about 1,000. Well, the last time I knew, about 1,000 Australian dollars per kilogram. And we have what's called fishing seasons with catch limits here in Australia. And the reason, I guess, that I'm mentioning this is so that people can understand and be a little bit aware when they're purchasing, so that they can try and be an ethical purchaser, because obviously the abalone is in demand for food and also for its shell. So it's actually within Australia an endangered species, and so it's very protected. I'll talk about that more so in a little while. But as far as this particular shell goes that we're looking at here on this image, this one is a huge one. And I'm going to jump ahead and give you a little bit of a buyer's tip here before we actually get into the buying tips. This particular image I actually sourced on eBay, and it was selling for about 10 US dollars, which I must admit is a brilliant price. It's extremely tempting. Rarely do I see abalone shell for that cheap. But the point being, and look at the size of it, I must add, it fits into this person's hands. It's bigger than the two of them. So it's a very big abalone shell. It was obviously a very mature abalone, and that price is super cheap. But the reality is, for us buyers here in Australia, the question would be, how much is the freight going to be? Because at the moment, currency conversion, Australian dollars performing very poorly against the US dollar. And when it comes to the freight, the reality is that this particular $10 abalone shell might end up becoming about $150 by the time it crosses borders. Now, as with anything metaphysical, it's associated with the Zodiac, the Astro. Now, this is the information that I'm found. I personally don't see the links between crystals and the Astro signs usually. I mean, there's a couple of ones that I do look at and think, yeah, I can see how they relate. But at the same time, I'm not sure how people reach these conclusions. And I've said this before on other videos. I think it might be to do with numerology, the numerology of the Zodiac, and potentially, I don't know, the numerology of the actual crystal. But really, I don't know how they come to those conclusions. So I personally maintain that basically, if you feel drawn towards a crystal, then buy that crystal. It doesn't matter what your star sign is. The other thing too is this is another reason why I recommend people stop buying online actually and go back to the going into a retail facility and actually handling the crystal or the product themselves, because quite often we will buy because we feel that we must have an item. We either feel it resonate energetically, or we just have that inner knowing, the gut instinct. And when we go home and we check the metaphysical properties, we can look at it and go like, ah, yes, of course, no wonder I was drawn to it. And that's the beauty of what we call crystal magic as well. Now, when it comes to doing a metaphysical overview of the properties of abalone shell, it does carry with it what we call higher vibration. I consider it to be a higher vibration. Crystal is not the word for it because it's obviously not a crystal, although the shell itself has a mineral makeup, let's be real. But from an overview perspective, it's associated with the higher realms, nature kingdom, if you like, Gaia, spiritual protection, transformation, spiritual growth and empowerment, and also, did I say, purification. But I will be talking about the metaphysical attributes a little further on in the video. All my videos have structure, by the way. I try and keep to a pattern so it makes it easier for the listener to just jump to the parts that they're interested in. So realistically, on the other videos, I actually do provide a little bit of mineral information. Of course, when we talk about abalone, we're not talking about any rock formation. We're actually talking about an animal shelter is the bottom line. But there is a backstory with abalone as well, a whole history that I find to be quite interesting. But with the images, what I've put up here is some images of, well, in fact, the one on the left and the one top right, they are both what we call abalone shell. And what I know to be abalone, because it becomes very distinctive. PAUA shell, which is the New Zealand abalone, always tends to have these more brilliant blues in it. And I don't know if that's got something to do with the weather patterns or whatever. But the reason why I put this image back here as well is because I'm going to explain to you, if you're not aware of it, most people are aware that you've got to shuck an oyster to get the oyster flesh out. Well, the same happens with the abalone. You've got an abalone that basically is like in some ways, I guess, I would encourage people to have a Google of them. They are absolutely not a pretty animal when you look at them in the shell and when they're alive, but they have to be shucked out of that shell so that we can have the shell. Now, bearing in mind, I just told you that it's about 1,000 Australian dollars a kilo the last time I knew for abalone meat. I would like to think that they're not actually just, you know what I mean, wantonly killing the abalone. Look, it's not a fish, okay? It's a bit, like I say, a bit more like a snail. But the bottom line is, I can understand if people are legitimately fishing. So I need to put this into perspective here, okay? Because it is an animal and because it's endangered species, really, we could compare it back to when people used to take the tusks off the elephants and the rhinos and that kind of thing. So these days, it is, to be able to catch abalone in Australia, you've got to be a licensed fisherman to start with, and there is restrictions on how much they can take. There is also where the average Australian wants to go out and get some abalone if they so feel like it and they can be bothered going through it. Very, very restricted seasons, and there's not only bag size limits, there's also limits on the size of the abalone that you can catch. So if they manage to get one that was too small, they've got to throw it back into the ocean. But either way, just going back to it, the animal actually is pretty disgusting and gross looking, but it is absolutely delicious. All right. And I've got to say, I was very lucky to be able to have it, certainly the Australian one, because I actually met some abalone fishermen many years ago. And I think nowadays there's only one family that's licensed to do the fishing to export to China. So lucky them. That arrow, by the way, I'm going to talk about this in the buying tips in a little while. What that is actually the shell has not been cleaned properly by whoever has harvested that and taken the meat out. They haven't cleaned the shell properly at the end of it. It can be cleaned better than that. And you see that in the top picture that there is none of that brownish residue in there. That residue can come off. So that's a buying tip to start with. You don't have to buy it like that. Anyway, when we talk about the mineral information, as I said, we can't do it, but we can talk about the fact that, abalone has been popular for thousands of years, prized for the taste and for the shell. And apparently the Native Americans used to call it a wello, a Whello. Hopefully I've pronounced that correctly. And it was used as a form of trade and currency. And they've actually found it at digs. Now, of course, most Westerners will know that it's been popular for us because they were used as buttons back in the old days. More recent years, you quite often see jewellery boxes where it's been inlaid. So it can be very stunning. But the other thing I want to draw to your attention is that when we look at the pictures of what I call abalone, this is the type of stuff that we get from Australia. I have bought some Chinese abalone shells, and they are like the image on the left. That's what I've got. The Australian ones tend to be more like the image on the top right, and the PAUA shell, as I say, is easily identified when you're looking at abalone species because of that brilliant blue. Just in case you weren't aware, anything metaphysical that's got rainbows is generally associated with celestial beings. So, as I say, today the buying tips are primarily, will certainly include the ethical buying. So, I did a bit of research here because I wouldn't know if I hadn't gone and done this research. I knew that there were restrictions, but basically, the image that I've got that's called rose abalone, if you end up buying any of that, that's banned. It is completely banned for fishing, as I understand it, here in Australia, as is what we call the green lip abalone. Now, the other one where we call the brown lip abalone up the top, you would expect that when you're buying your abalone shell here in Australia, whether it's PAUA or whether it's brown lip, that they will have that kind of backing on it. If it's got the smooth or the more circular type appearance to it, then definitely those ones are particularly endangered. And in fact, if I went into a store now that I know what they look like and I saw them selling either of these, I would be basically saying to them, you need to have a word with your supplier because they are supporting an illegal, illicit industry that is harmful to these animals, which, of course, we want to preserve and protect them as well. The other thing that I'd be a little bit concerned about here when we look at these images and it's buying is take a look at the size of that pendant. If I'm trying to be generous to whoever has crafted that particular pendant, I could turn around and say, well, perhaps it was dropped by a seagull or something like that. But I really doubt it very much. Because it is so small. That would suggest to me that people are harvesting the very small shells, which is the small animals. So they're totally interrupting sustainable use of Mother Earth's benefits, if you say, to make necklaces. I actually would refuse to buy that, to be honest. And once again, I'd probably tell the seller that I don't think it's a good idea, or ask them to buy, to do what other people do, which is actually they get the bigger shells and they break them down. However they do it, they cut them or whatever, and then they form a mosaic sort of patterned pendant, as opposed to having a tiny little shell. So you see more clearly on these images that I've got here, these are much better quality abalone shells, but there's no yucky brown in the centre of these shells, and that's because all of the residual animal, sounds disgusting and gross, but it's actually true, it's been removed. And I don't honestly know, because I think I've got a piece of abalone shell that actually has that browny stuff in it. It could actually just be a form of salt calcification or whatever, but either way, it can be cleaned to what you see here. And To some extent, I would say, so I'm just going to have a look at my notes here, sorry, because this is some tips that I got from buying recently online. So, okay, what I did was I bought a PAUA shell and it was absolutely beautiful. And because I was getting back into the process of buying, I didn't think to actually ask the lady to show me the photo of the back of the PAUA. So, when it arrived, this central image that you've got here with the two face up shells where you get to see the beautiful colours and then you see the crusty white back of the other one, that's what my PAUA arrived as. And I've got to say, it is very hard. It's got sharp edges on it. It was quite disappointing, to be honest. I looked at it and I thought, gosh, gee, if I'd known it was going to be like that, I wouldn't have bought it, okay? Because the point is, it's not just sharp when it sits in your hand, and I don't mean it's sharp enough to cut you or whatever, but when you put it down, if you've got soft surfaces, and I've got a lot of wood in this house, there's a real risk that that stuff is going to scratch the surfaces, which is not what you want to have happen. And the bottom line is, I guess, in many ways, I look at that and I think that's just sheer laziness. I've actually had a bit of an adjustment to my viewpoint since making this video. Actually, this is part of the learning. But you can see also that on that image of the left, that once again is PAUA shell. We can tell by the brilliance of the blues and the greens, where they've cleaned half of the shell and left the other half in its natural state. And you can see that actually, if you really want to get the full beauty of the abalone shell, you actually need to take that back off. That's where most of the beauty lies, as far as I'm concerned. But anyway, what I was going to say is the reason why I now am not quite so harsh about the people that are selling these PAUA shells is because I do know already, because of having my Chinese ones, just so that you know, my Chinese abalone shells, they did arrive. They don't have the same brilliance of colour as the PAUA, but also whoever sold them to me obviously at least took the time to brush off all the barnacles. So it's still a bit crusty looking, but you can actually see the brightness of the colours coming through this calcified hard stuff, which tells me it probably wouldn't take a lot to actually get it off. Which is why I was a little bit judgmental before about them being a bit on the lazy side. But what I've done is I realised in the course of this video, I knew how to get it off. I did a Google and I saw that you just do a hydrochloric acid bath. Okay, now that's dangerous, just so you know. It requires having the correct safety gear. You've got to be very careful, obviously, when you use it because it is an acid, but it also tells you just how strong abalone shell is. And anyway, so there's online videos on how you can actually do it, and it didn't look like massively hard work. And then as I've been doing this video, I've realised the hardship is actually not so much in the cleaning of the PAUA shell or the abalone shell, it's actually disposing of the bath afterwards. Because here in Australia, the problem is we have, what do we call it? I've written it down in my notes, and of course I've lost it. Basically, it's controlled disposals. We can't just throw acid down the drain. And even though, just to be clear, if you were thinking about this, I've got to point out, beside the fact it's a safety issue, it's a hydrochloric acid solution. So it's apparently a very small ratio of acid to water. But either way, it's still not something you would put down the drain here in Australia. So if you were looking at doing something like that, you'd need to find out what your own local laws are. Here in Australia, it's completely illegal. But what I did see was that if you were to put it down the drains, and once again, there's danger with this as well, you've got to neutralise it. And I thought, oh, okay, because that's me. Oh, well, I could do that, right? And then but how do you neutralise it? Okay, so what I found was that you add bicarb of soda. This is what we call it in Australia. Now, the thing with bicarb of soda, remember, is that it fizzes, okay? And so you would want to have your full safety gear on if you were going to be doing this, just in case it splashes and that kind of stuff. But anyway, apparently once it stops fizzing, so you add a little bit of bicarb at a time until it stops fizzing, and then it's considered to be completely neutralised and safe to throw it down your drain. If you throw it down the drain without neutralising it, you may actually blow out the local pipes. In Australia, it can be harmful to the pipes and the sewerage systems, not to mention dangerous to any of the water animals, shall we say. And I don't know why I kept that image of that little pendant on here. I think it's because I look at it and I feel a little bit sad because that was a baby animal that never got the chance to grow up. Never mind, moving on. So anyway, I've grabbed myself a drink of water because I was a bit dry-throated there. Let's have a chat about the spiritual metaphysical benefits. So to start with, because it's got the rainbow in it, whether it's this deep blue or not, anything that tends to have this rainbow aspect to it is associated with the higher realms, the celestial realms, the Gaia, nature kingdom, and about connecting and communicating with those higher beings. So it's also associated with transformation, spiritual growth, and development. It's said to balance the polarities within, which is the yin and the yang, if I can speak, or the masculine and feminine components of who and what we are. Now, hopefully you will have done a bit of research on what that actually means, because we're not talking about gender here. We're talking about a millennia of association with feminine being water, the metaphysical concepts, nature, nurture, that kind of thing, and nourishment. And then, of course, the masculine is associated with the more practical concerns, the provision, protect, all of that stuff. But anyway, moving on from that, it's also associated with the animal kingdom, and that, of course, includes marine life and the birds, because that's all part of it. And so, technically speaking, if you were wanting to work on, say, animal telepathy, you would be able to work with the Abalone shell or the PAUA to enhance that capacity to communicate. The other thing is it's supposed to purify the aura and cleanse and shield it, both the aura and the etheric body. Gosh, I've written that in twice actually, looking at the slide, and I'm not going to edit it before I upload it because I'm running behind today. So when we talk about Gaia is generally referred to as the Mother Earth energy. And so some people might think, oh, well, talking about Gaia and the nature kingdom is a reference also to goddess energy. Well, no, actually, they're different. Goddess energy, of course, you have multiple different forms of goddesses, and actually, technically speaking, if this wasn't the start of a sentence, I'm being grammar police of myself here. When we talk about goddess, she doesn't normally have a capital G, okay? She's got a lowercase g. So we are talking about goddess energy and connecting. So if you were perhaps, because there's so many of them out there, if, say, you had a fascination with Kuan Yin or Tara being another goddess that comes to mind straight away, and you were wanting to connect and communicate with their energy, you could draw upon the Abalone shell to enhance that. So it's also said to open a person to experience the feelings of divine love and that divine and loving energy. Now, what else can I say about this? Quite simply that I believe, this is just my interpretation and based on my understanding of colours and just how it feels to me, is that I actually think that the PAUA shell, because it's got all of those blues within it and the turquoise, is actually associated with the protection of Archangel Michael and some very high level healing energy, which opens up to the psychic gifts. You know what I mean? It opens up the brow chakra, certainly. Just going back to the goddess energy for a moment, that actually is about a softening of the personal verbal expression and communication as well. Just if you were interested in that, that's all part of it. Anyway, so suffice to say, it's a highly spiritual part of anybody's collection. So basically, at a glance, when I first looked at this, I thought, actually, the Abalone shell is not really associated with a lot of physical benefits, actually, as far as health goes. And then I broke it down a little bit more. Look, the bottom line is anxiety, stress, and those kind of conditions do impact on the physical as well with the neural pathways, remember. So it's going to support good health with that, because we'll look at the emotional slide in a moment, but it definitely is a good emotional stabilizer, shall we say. But it's also associated with the digestive system. And so that's a very blanket statement to make, the digestive system, okay? There's more to the digestive system than what we're looking at quite quite here if I can talk right here. So it's about the healthy function. So if you've got any conditions, oral conditions, it could be gum conditions, or tonsillitis or things like that, or a susceptibility to it, any of these parts of the body, then it's said to enhance that healthy function. Now, if you had more time and I had more time, there's a lot more organs and whatever, because you're talking about waste elimination and all of that kind of thing that is part of the digestive system. The other thing that I thought was worth a reference to, though, was that when we talk about the mouth and conditions of the mouth and that kind of stuff, it could be people that have got problems with swallowing food. That becomes a health condition such as dysphagia, if that's how you pronounce it. If people suffer from acid reflux or heartburn, that also is another physical condition. And then there are other people that might have sensory disorders, such as they don't taste. People can't taste certain flavors, if you like. That's quite common, actually, I believe, for some people with autism or on the spectrum. I don't know what the politically correct word is these days, but sometimes they have sensory issues. They might not feel temperature. They might have problems with body regulation and that kind of thing. But then another problem that is physical that perhaps the abalone shell might work for is if somebody's got Crohn's or irritable bowel syndrome. Now, the other thing too is I didn't see this written anywhere, but I feel it in my bones. Okay, it is recommended to treat skeletal structures to support that. That's not the part that I'm going to talk about, though. The part of my gut instinct. So it is recommended for people that have got issues of basically to do with their bones, if they've had a bone break or a fracture and trying to promote recovery. If they've got issues with their teeth, it's supposed to be beneficial there. The part that I haven't seen anywhere, but my gut instinct is saying, I wonder whether or not, if a person suffers with things like calcification of their vertebrae, whether or not they might benefit from it. I don't know anybody that has tried it out, but I'd be interested in hearing. So yeah, look, if that's one of your ailments and you live with that and you want to give it a bit of a shot, let us know. And the issue would be, how would you actually use it? I think probably wear it as a pendant if you're suffering from any of these conditions. So, from an emotional perspective, it really does come into its own. Because obviously it's highly spiritual, but it soothes and calms any emotional turmoil that a person may be experiencing. If a person suffers from a mood disorder, then apparently it balances and uplifts. It's said to inspire creativity and artistic expression. And if a person struggles with, that whole focus on negative thinking, apparently it supports transformation of those negative thoughts into positive thoughts. Instead of focusing on the what ifs, a person starts to, I guess, turn it around. If you basically are a worrywart and feeling burdened by the world, then it helps to lift the burdens. Said to calm mind chatter, and to put things into perspective. Stress, tension, anxiety relieves it, builds and promotes compassion, and restores, I guess, faith and courage, and promotes it. So those are the emotional and thought processes associated with the abalone. Now, from a chakra perspective, because the abalone carries the hues of the rainbow within it, it's actually associated with all the chakras. So you can use it in any form of chakra work that you're doing, whether it's gridding, if you're trying to release blockages and those kind of things, you can use it for that. But while this is quite commonly stated, this is my own input into this. I actually believe it's probably more closely related with what is called the rainbow chakra. I call it the rainbow chakra anyway. I can't remember what its proper name is, but it's about a foot above the crown chakra. And it actually has, I suppose it actually looks like the inside of an abalone shell. It's white with all the colours reflecting in it. And what was I going to say? Some people call it the angel chakra because obviously it enhances that connection. So as we've talked about this through the video, you will have heard that there's multiple ways that you can use your abalone shell. And obviously it's very popular as a dish for saging. When it comes to jewellery items though, it really is generally not found as that whole baby shell, but rather that mosaic inlaid aspect that I was talking about. And that could be a pendant or a bracelet. It depends on how big the shell was that they've broken into smaller parts. As I said, you can find it on jewellery boxes. I'm just sort of thinking at the moment, the way I'm using a lot of the abalone shells that I've got is I'm actually putting other crystals inside of it. So I guess without thinking about it, I'm using, and I actually need to tap in and try and ask my guides this actually. I just realised I might actually be replacing some of my selenite with the abalone shell. So I'm not 100% sure. I need to go and reflect myself on whether or not I feel that abalone actually acts as a purifier as selenite does, because that would be quite interesting. Because I am actually just through my own inner guidance laying it around the house and just popping crystals inside of it. I'm not really a big fan of using your abalone shells for saging and incensing, although it clearly is very popular. And this is because I am well aware that prolonged exposure to heat is probably one of the few things that can damage the shell. I'm not proud to admit this, but I can tell you exactly how I know this, and that's because I damaged one. Because for those that don't know, yes, I do smoke cigarettes, and I broke my ashtray and I started using one of my PAUA shells as a ashtray, and then I noticed after quite some period of time the heat did damage it. It wasn't quite the same. I had to dispose of it in the end. So that's not really a good way to treat your shells, okay? So to be honest, I hadn't really given a lot of thought to abalone as a messenger, okay? But after last night, because I took all my crystals out as well, it didn't escape my attention that some people are drawn to the abalone. And when I make the links, I feel that there's an aspect of those people where their entire being is screaming for some inner peace, because they're under really heightened, stressful situations. And so I guess that I would then see this as they are being guided and reminded that to be open, to take that space to center, to calm, and to be open to receiving that divine embrace. So if I was to summarize that, I would say, I thought of this myself and I realized I'd written a little poem afterwards. Create the quiet space and allow yourself to feel the divine embrace. That is what I believe the message is here. So, after sharing with you about how I've mistreated abalone shell and power in the past, I guess you will recognise that caring for abalone shell is actually really not that difficult. It is incredibly hardy, okay? And I actually believe this is why, or the reason why it's so hardy, is because if you look at the shell here, that thick lip on the right-hand side of the image, that is really hard and solid. But of course, if when the shell or the animal is being shucked, they break that lip, and then of course it becomes more fragile, but it's still a pretty hardy shell. And the older the animal gets, the harder that shell gets. It's the baby ones that have got the soft shells, and it is the younger the abalone is, the more it is a food source for the other sea creatures, if you like, because obviously starfish and the octopi have got a beak that they can break through it. Crayfish and crabs, well, we call them crayfish, you might call them rock lobsters. They also prey on the abalone and they'll crush it with their claws, of course. So the only thing, and obviously I've already told you that you can actually clean these shells with hydrochloric acid solutions. Not that I would do it, I'm not recommending you do it because it's dangerous, okay? But the only thing that I know of that can actually damage the abalone shell is heat. So I don't believe, but I'm open to correction. I'm certainly open to hearing what you've got to say. I don't think that the abalone shell needs to be charged. I don't think it needs any special cleansing. I don't believe that you need to put it out in the moonlight or the sunlight or whatever. If you've got it as a pendant, you might want to rest it on some selenite if you so desire. But I'm not sure that it's necessary to actually do it. It might just be for your common sense or for your own sense of comfort. The rest of the abalone shell care, I believe, is actually just quite practical. If it's dirty, I know for a fact that you can actually shove it into soapy water. I wouldn't use steel wool on it, it would probably scratch it, but you can give it a good scrub with a scrubbing brush or whatever, and it seems to survive quite well. But if you have a different experience, let me know. I'm very open to hearing about it. So for now, my friends, that's about all I can share with you. It's been a long video, but it's not, I can do them longer. Trust me, I've managed to condense it a bit today. I am hot and bothered. We've had a heat wave today. So I'm going to actually go rest and restore myself, and just say, look, thanks very much for being part of my journey. Have a wonderful day, wonderful week. Catch you on the next one. Bye bye for now.